Good morning and welcome everyone in the room and those watching online through the live stream at HIV.gov to the 81st Presidential Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS, also known as PACHA, full council meeting. My name is Marlene McNeese. My pronouns are she and her, and I am one of the co-chairs of PACHA. I currently serve as a Deputy Assistant Director with the Houston Health Department, overseeing the Bureau of HIV, STI, and Viral Hepatitis Prevention. Before we get started this morning, I want to briefly define the PACHA Charter, our charge and mission. PACHA provides advice, information, and recommendations to the Secretary of Health and Human Services regarding programs, policies, and research to promote effective treatment, prevention, and cure of HIV and its relative syndemics. This includes the Ending the HIV Epidemic in the U.S. initiative and monitoring the implementation of the updated National HIV/AIDS strategy. Through the Office of the Secretary, PACHA may also make recommendations for consideration by the Director of the White House Office of National HIV/AIDS Policy, ONAP, as appropriate, concerning implementation and progress in achieving the strategy goals. Under the authorities given in the Presidential Memorandum and Executive Order 13703, PACHA shall contribute to the federal effort to improve HIV prevention and care. According to what you see depicted now on your screen, there are a few basic reminders for all PACHA members. PACHA must vote on recommendations at full council meetings. PACHA is solely advisory in nature. PACHA members are special government employees, and as such, the Hatch Act does apply during PACHA duties. PACHA does not advise non-HHS agencies or Congress. PACHA is not a funder nor the voice of one person, and our recommendations are just that, they're recommendations and not mandates. I really want to talk a bit about PACHA's work on yesterday. Our official meeting began with site visits on yesterday, and I really want to thank the incredible organizations who do incredible work and invited us into their homes and into their spaces. Happy Pride Month to everyone, and in honor of the 1969 Stonewall Uprising in Manhattan that became a tipping point for the gay liberation movement in the U.S., I'm happy to be back in the Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia area, home to one of the largest Pride celebrations in the country. I want to express my gratitude and appreciation for PACHA members and our federal colleagues who are able to join us here this week. When we do meet in the DC area, PACHA members have found it valuable to engage with community and federal partners about key organizational priorities that are moving us closer to ending the HIV epidemic and where, as a country, we may still be stalled. PACHA started our official duties through these site visits and learning about how we may move our efforts forward by visiting Whitman Walker Health, the Max Robinson Center, a 65,000 square feet state-of-the-art medical space. It's difficult to describe it all. I remember one member during the site visit coined the phrase for them as the Ivy League level of community health centers in the U.S. So we really have to express our gratitude to Chief Executive Officer Naseema Shafi and her phenomenal staff for sharing some of their innovations, including medical legal partnerships where attorneys are a part of the medical team to ensure advocacy and access to needed services for their patients. And lastly, with their creative use of their workforce to deliver injectable prep and meet capacity demands for the prescriber and for the patients. Our next stop was with the Human Rights Campaign, wonderfully hosted by the Tori in Baskerville, Director of the HIV and Health Equity Program, and not to mention where our own fellow PACHA member Tori Cooper serves as Director of Community Engagement and the Transgender Justice Initiative. The Human Rights Campaign, as we all know, works tirelessly to make equity, equality, and liberation for all LGBTQ people are committed to ensuring that they do good health work, and especially in the HIV space. So I really have to say thank you to the Human Rights Campaign. And then our last stop took us to HIPS, led by my long-term friend and colleague, Cindy Clay. I walk away with their new slogan, "Hip Hips Hooray." And I cannot express enough gratitude for her passionate group of staff and leaders comprised almost exclusively of persons with lived experience. I had many opportunities to pull a few of them to the side and have my own personal conversations with them. And so I really appreciate their commitment to advancing the health rights and dignity of people and communities impacted by sex work and drug use through non-judgmental harm reduction services. I believe that their space and their program and their reach serves as a model for other programs to follow, literally by them offering around the clock services out in their communities who need it most. So on behalf of PACHA, I really have to say thank you. It's not always easy to host such a large group within some of these spaces, and I understand the slight panic that occurs when we call and ask to visit with those organizations and work with our time constraints. But every time, the hospitality that is offered, the graciousness that is offered, and dedication to the mission of ending HIV is quite impressive. So I want to thank each one of them. I will close. I'm joined here this morning by my esteemed colleague and PACHA co-chair, Dr. Vincent Guillermo Ramos, who hosted us yesterday evening at a beautiful Johns Hopkins University opening and welcome reception. It was a great and wonderful wrap up to our first day, and I had an incredible time. Thank you, Vincent, and I will turn the floor over to you and invite you to have your opening comments.
Thank you very much, Marlene. So good morning, I'm Vincent Guillermo Ramos. I'm the other co-chair of PACHA. I won't go into a long introduction. What I will do is say that I'm delighted to see everyone this morning, and it was such an honor and a pleasure to have everyone at Johns Hopkins last night for our opening reception. I do want to take a moment to just sort of go through the run of show for today. We've got a fantastic meeting over the next 2 days, and I think it would be nice to highlight a number of things that are coming up today. So after our opening remarks, we'll have roll call. That will be followed by comments from Admiral Rachel Levine, who is here with us. Thank you very much for being here. Admiral Levine's comments will be followed by Director Francisco Ruiz. We're excited to have Director Ruiz with us. That will then move into a discussion from the Director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, Dr. Marrazzo, who will join us roughly shortly before 10 a.m. this morning. We'll have an MPOX update, and we'll have then after that a little bit of a break. Today's a little bit of a heavy agenda in terms of presentations, but boy, is the content rich, and there's a lot that we're looking forward to learning and having discussion about. After our break, we'll have time to really look at the state of the science. What do the current data say about the HIV epidemic in the United States? We have a number of speakers, including myself, but we're looking forward to hearing from Dr. Sullivan, from Katarina Kim, excuse me, and from Stacy Cohen from the CDC. That will be followed by a post-lunch continuation, where we will then turn to a series of presentations from federal partners. We'll hear from the CDC, we'll hear from HRSA, from HHS. We'll have a break. Throughout the day, we'll have time for Q&A, and then we'll continue in the afternoon segment, and we'll focus on more discussion and more presentation from NIH and SAMHSA. And then last but certainly not least, the Indian Health Service. We'll wrap up today with some discussion, also with some public comment, and Marlene and I will summarize with next steps and closing remarks. I'll hold for the agenda for tomorrow. We've got a pretty ambitious agenda for today, but I think what I wanted to convey is that this meeting is actually quite rich with lots of opportunities for PACHA to become informed about what's happening around the country. So thank you very much for being here.
Next on our agenda, we will turn it over for our official roll call. As announced in our March meeting at the conclusion in Houston, the baton was passed from our beloved Kay Hayes to our extremely capable and passionate colleague, Ms. Carolyn Talib. It is my honor and pleasure to turn the floor over to Ms. Talib, Executive Director, Presidential Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS, PACHA.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning. And with that, we'll start the roll call. So PACHA co-chair Marlene McNeese,
Present.
PACHA co-chair Vincent Guillermo Ramos,
Present.
Guillermo Chacon, Philip Chan, Tori Cooper, Rania Copeland,
Present.
Mackenzie Copley,
Present.
Alicia Diggs,
Present.
Jennifer Cates,
Present.
Paul Kawada, Duvia Lozano,
Present.
Tomi Luckett, Jesse Mylan, DeAndre Moore,
Present.
Leo Moore, Laura Platero, Kayla Quimbley, Natalie Sanchez,
Present.
Patrick Sullivan,
Present.
Jeff Taylor,
Present.
Marvell Terry II,
Present.
Hansel Tukes,
Present.
Carol Treston,
Present.
Defina Ward,
Present.
Daryl Wheeler,
Present.
and CDC HRSA Advisory Committee on HIV, viral hepatitis, and STD prevention and treatment liaison, Wendy Armstrong.
Present.
Thank you. And now to our federal partners, Kay Hayes,
Present.
Timothy Harrison,
Present.
Francisco Ruiz, Adrian Shanker, Jonathan Jono Merman, Robin Nablet Fanfare,
Present.
Laura Cheever,
Present.
Erna Hughes,
Present.
Kristen Roja,
Present.
Mary Glenshaw, Jessica Lee, Michelle Schreiber,
Present.
Rita Hartgrove,
Present.
John Ogotumalade,
Present.
Andrea Kahlo,
Present.
Casey Note,
Present.
Sharonda Brown,
Present.
Maureen Goodnow.
Present.
Thank you very much. That concludes the roll calls.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. So I have the honor of introducing Admiral Rachel Levine. Admiral Rachel Levine serves as the 17th Assistant Secretary for Health for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the head of the U.S. Public Health Service Commission Corps. Admiral Levine fights every day to improve the health and well-being of all Americans. She's working to ensure health equity, is front and center to build a stronger foundation for a healthier future, one in which all people and places in our nation can thrive. Admiral Levine started her career first as a pediatrician and adolescent medicine specialist in academic medicine, focused on the intersection between mental and physical health, treating children, adolescents, and young adults, then as Pennsylvania's physician general, and later as Pennsylvania's Secretary of Health. She addressed COVID-19, the opioid crisis, behavioral health, and many, many other public health challenges. Welcome, Admiral Levine.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Guillermo Ramos, for your kind introduction. And I sincerely appreciate the very dedicated leadership that you and Ms. McNeese provide as co-chairs of PACHA. Greetings, council members, federal colleagues, and community partners that are gathered in person, but also viewing live online from across the nation. It is truly my pleasure to join you for the 81st full council meeting of the Presidential Council on HIV/AIDS, the 81st. Wow, that's what I say. Today, June 5th, is HIV Long-Term Survivors Awareness Day, which is a day to honor long-term survivors of HIV and raise awareness about survivors' journeys. It is also the anniversary of the day in 1981 that the United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention first reported in the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report about 5 cases of a rare pneumonia affecting young gay men living in California, and that 2 of the men died from their illness. This was truly the beginning of what would later be identified as HIV/AIDS. In 1981, I was in medical school at Tulane, in New Orleans, and I remember this report. To the long-term HIV survivors on the council and watching today, please know that we see you, that we hear you, and we are so glad that you are with us. I am so pleased that our national HIV/AIDS strategy incorporates a focus on HIV and aging and long-term survivors to propel our collective work in this area. And I look forward to the advice of PACHA's long-term and lifetime survivors subcommittee that will aid in those efforts. Now, June 27th is National HIV/AIDS Testing Day, and thank you to Director Francisco Ruiz, Kay Hayes, Dr. Jonathan Merman, and Captain Robin Nebelet Fanfare for identifying this year's theme, which is Level Up Your Self-Love, Check Your Status. Level up your self-love, check your status. This theme emphasizes valuing yourself, showing yourself compassion and respect, and honoring your health needs with self-love. HIV testing is a key component of our national response to HIV. Expanding access to HIV testing in clinical and community settings, along with self-testing, is vital to connecting people to the HIV treatment and prevention services that they need. Truly, in this day and age, with PrEP and with ART and U=U, treatment is prevention, and prevention is treatment. The most recent national HIV surveillance data published by the CDC just last month indicated the proportion of people with HIV who are unaware of their status did decline slightly in 2022, which is an encouraging indicator of progress. June is also Pride Month. Happy Pride. Or as I like to say, the beginning of the summer of Pride. I love declaring the summer of Pride. It particularly aggravates people who are not our supporters. But that's not the only reason why I like it. I want to wish a happy Pride to all of you. During Pride Month, we uplift the community's many contributions to our nation's HIV response and to every part of society. Pride gives me hope, hope for the future. The many Pride celebrations coming up this month are amazing opportunities to advance health equity in our LGBTQI+ communities, with a particular focus of the syndemic of health conditions, including HIV, viral hepatitis, Mpox, STIs broadly, and syphilis, all of which disproportionately affect this population. My office is collaborating with the CDC, the White House, and other federal partners to implement our Summer of Pride outreach to mobilize the LGBTQI+ community around Mpox education, vaccination, and other actions to prevent a resurgence. We are particularly focused on increasing Mpox vaccine access and uptake for the populations most at risk by offering those services alongside other HIV and STI testing and prevention services. And I'm glad you'll be hearing more about our Mpox activities later this morning from Dr. Tevin Warren. Speaking as both a public health official and as a physician, if you have not already been vaccinated against Mpox, now is the time. CDC recommends that people with HIV and others at risk for Mpox get vaccinated with both doses of the 2-dose Jynneos vaccine. If you've had only 1 dose, get the second. 2 doses provide the best protection, and please talk with your healthcare provider if the Mpox vaccine is right for you. Now, I would like to update you all on our National Syphilis and Congenital Syphilis Syndemic Federal Task Force, which I am leading. And as you know, the task force was developed in response to our nation's accelerating syphilis crisis. During STI Awareness Week in April, the task force held a webinar entitled At the Crossroads, the Syndemic of Syphilis, Substance Use, and Child Welfare During Pregnancy. The webinar addressed the social and structural drivers for infectious disease and barriers experienced by pregnant and postpartum people with untreated substance use disorders. This webinar featured potential policy solutions and best practices, such as the importance of bundled STI screenings. Presenters noted the importance of connecting communities with mental health resources, substance use disorder clinics, housing, and other vital resources and services. The task force's work has also involved engaging with many key non-federal partners on activities that can help us reduce the rates of syphilis and congenital syphilis. Last month, the American College of OBGYN, ACOG, updated their guidance on syphilis screening during pregnancy. They now recommend that OBGYNs and other medical providers screen all pregnant individuals for syphilis 3 times during pregnancy. And we applaud this clear guidance and are confident that it will help reduce the incidence of congenital syphilis. PACHA is a critical partner in addressing this alarming syphilis trend. The interconnectedness of HIV with this endemic of syphilis and congenital syphilis underscores the critical need for comprehensive public health strategies, and we must simultaneously address HIV and STIs to mitigate their overlapping impacts on individuals and communities. There are a couple other issues that I want to mention in terms of syphilis. One is that the CDC released yesterday the final guidance on doxy-PEP, doxy post-exposure prophylaxis, which I think is a real advance in terms of preventing the development of sexually transmitted infections. So please look at that new guidance that is just out in the MMWR. We are also going to be releasing considerations from the task force, essentially from my desk, about the use of the rapid syphilis testing capabilities. The finger stick rapid syphilis testing, the point of care testing, which I think offers, depending upon where you're located, a tremendous opportunity in terms of addressing populations, for instance, in the ER, in urgent care centers, in drug treatment centers, in syringe service programs for diagnosing syphilis and instituting rapid treatment. We are also working with Pfizer, the primary manufacturer of Bicillin LA, the standard of care treatment for syphilis, to ramp up their production so that we can use the standard of care treatment as well. So lots of work being done by our task force. I'd like to thank all of the task force members, which are really all the divisions that's at HHS, including, of course, CDC, FDA, NIH, Indian Health Service, HRSA, and many more that are working on this in addition to the VA and the DoD and others. And it really is all hands on deck in terms of addressing the syphilis crisis and the syndemic of HIV, viral hepatitis, and other sexually transmitted infections, and substance use, particularly use of opioids such as fentanyl compounds, fentanyl-related drugs, and methamphetamine and others. With so much amazing work being done, I do want to take a moment to thank 2 incredible leaders. First, I would like to publicly honor Ms. Kay Hayes. Deputy Assistant Secretary for Infectious Disease and Director of the Office of Infectious Disease and HIV/AIDS Policy, Kay expertly served as PACHA's Executive Director for 12 years. For 12 years. Precociously, she was 15 when she started. Very young to be PACHA's Executive Director. Anyone who knows Kay knows that she keeps her foot on the pedal and is dedicated to a healthier and more equitable future for our nation. She is passionate about mentorship. And during PACHA's recent meeting in Houston, she passed the baton to her mentee, Carolyn Talev, who now serves as PACHA's Executive Director. As we celebrate this new chapter for PACHA and welcome Carolyn to her new role, I would like to recognize Kay for her leadership and her commitment to public health. Please join me as I present Kay Hayes with a certificate of recognition and a letter of appreciation for her time as Executive Director of PACHA. Is anyone available to take a picture?
Here we go.
Oh, I think we have
But we're not done. Okay, thank you and congratulations for a job well done. Your steadfast leadership will be greatly appreciated, and your support and guidance help shape the council into the valuable advisory body that it is today. Now, serving on PACHA is no small lift, and we understand that membership on the council is additional commitment to everything else that people do for their communities and their institutions. It's just another full-time job. So, Dr. Guillermo Ramos, you have served on the council since 2020 and took on the role of PACHA's co-chair last year. Though you will serve on PACHA until August, I did not want to miss an opportunity to recognize you during your final public meeting. While it may seem that 4 years of service has flown by, the communities that you empower have felt your impact and felt your leadership, and is tremendously appreciated. Please accept the certificate of recognition and letter of appreciation for your memorable service. And another picture. Kay and Vincent, thank you both for your tremendous leadership. Everyone, let's give another round of applause for them. Well, thank you so much for this opportunity to welcome you and welcome everyone to PACHA's 81st full council meeting. Our nation's capital area is brimming with action and community innovation, especially during Pride Month, and I hope you enjoy connecting with the DMV. I am excited for an uplifting next 2 days as the council explores, discusses, and uplifts in all of our efforts to truly end the HIV epidemic. We need a round of applause for that. Council members, federal partners, esteemed speakers, engaged attendees, thank you truly for everything that you do in your communities every single day, all across our nation. Together, we are working to create positive impacts, and we are paving the way for a safer and healthier future. Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you, Admiral Levine, for your leadership, your commitment. You are a responsive and impactful leader. Yes, thank you, PACHA. It goes without saying, all of the time and effort and commitment you put into people living with HIV/AIDS and your willingness to spend the time and energy that you did on site at the visits yesterday. I can tell you from many side conversations I had, particularly at HIPS, it will be a lasting impression on that group of people. So thank you, Dr. Levine.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
We will move forward in our agenda. We've had other notable batons being passed since our last meeting in Houston. And so the White House has appointed a new director to lead the Office of National AIDS Policy. And I am honored to congratulate and welcome Francisco Ruiz to this position. Francisco has worked at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention since 2013, and as the Senior Advisor for Program Innovation and Coordination within the Division of HIV Prevention, he played an integral role in shaping and advancing programs and the agency's engagement with community partners. Before joining the federal government, he also worked at my own beloved NASTAD, formerly known as the National Alliance of State and Territorial AIDS Directors, collaborating extensively with health departments to address the impact of HIV among key populations, including Black, Hispanic, and LGBTQ communities. His focus on engaging and working with diverse communities, his experience working in public health, and his commitment to addressing health disparities and inequities will continue to be of great benefit to the HIV service community and those who continue to work toward ending the epidemic. I will allow him now to take the floor and share more of himself and about himself and his remarks to the council. Welcome, Francisco.
Thank you. Buenos dias. Good morning. Thank you for the sweet introduction. I'm honored and excited to be here with everyone. It's great to see everyone around the room. And I had two inspirations before I wanted to get started. Admiral Levine shared one in terms of what the day that we're honoring today, June 5th, for our long-term survivors, as well as the work that started 43 years ago. But my second inspiration was last night with my predecessors, Jeff Crowley and Harold Phillips, not wearing a tie. So, so today I am not wearing a tie in their honor and in their following their legacy. But in serious note, as many of you know, the Biden and Harris administration relaunched the updated version of the National HIV Strategy that takes us till next year, 2025, back in December 2021. And the strategy reflects the administration's recommitment to and re-energizing of the HIV efforts in this country. The strategy, as you all know, has 4 primary goals: preventing HIV infection, improving health outcomes for those living with HIV, reducing HIV-related health disparities and inequalities, and achieving a coordinated national response. And so today, I'm excited to debut, if you will, our ONAP, and I purposely say our ONAP priorities. I see myself doing this alongside many of you, continue doing this work. And for almost 2 months, I've been meeting with our federal colleagues. I've been meeting with many of you, national organizations, community-based organizations, and clinics, as well as, and more importantly, people with HIV. And so some of these priorities are sort of building on momentum that we already have, and making sure that we sort of get to that finish line together. And so, as you know, we're at a critical juncture this year and in this work. And so I'm really excited to continue to do this work together with you. So the first priority, and I put them sort of in 3 buckets. The first priority is updating policies based on science. So we know many existing policies are outdated and oftentimes contribute to stigmatizing and discriminating against people with HIV and those disproportionately impacted by HIV. So reflecting the current scientific understanding, such as U equals U, or undetectable equals untransmittable, our policies must ensure equitable treatment and reduce HIV-related stigma. And we have had some recent wins in this area. And so many of you know, many of you worked on this. Last year, the FDA updated their blood donation guidelines, eliminating the outdated and discriminatory blanket exclusion based on gender and sexual orientation. And yesterday, actually, we hosted the White House, our very first LGBTQ+ inclusive blood drive in partnership with the American Red Cross. It was really exciting. And yesterday was as much about the lives we're saving by donating blood, but it was also about the lives we're honoring, allowing to be part of this very important work, and especially allowing our members of the queer community to be able to donate. It conveyed as much needed message to the LGBTQI+ people are welcome, and we are integral to the health and well-being of this nation. So it was really exciting to do that. We had, within 24 hours, all the slots were taken by White House staff. So that speaks to the dedication not only of the administration, but also the staff that's back working behind them. We also saw in 2022, the Secretary of Defense modify the DoD policy so HIV-positive individuals who are violently suppressed are now not restricted no longer to serve in armed forces, nor are they discharged or separately solely based on their HIV status. Another great involvement in an evolution in our work. But we have a lot more work to do in that space. And so our employment policies, right? So we've had some wins, but we must review all and revise all employee policies to ensure they do not unfairly and unnecessarily restrict employment opportunities, focusing on limiting discrimination and promoting inclusive workplace practices for people with HIV. These efforts were further also the executive order issued by the administration, Executive Order 13985, advancing racial, ethnic, and support for underserved communities, because we know many of our communities living with HIV are also Black, brown, and queer. Also, we need to look at our organ transplant and clinical trial guidelines. We must work with federal agencies, scientific community, healthcare professionals, and community members to promote understanding and implementation of revised policies that ensure equitable access to life-saving procedures and science for people for HIV. We also know that we need to look at our sexual health education curricula around the country. We need to ensure that our youth receive updated and accurate information about their health and well-being. Ensuring social curricula is up to date and non-discriminatory is crucial for fostering informed, healthy, and inclusive communities. And lastly, but not last, is criminalization. The administration plans to work with partners to assess and modernize laws that criminalize HIV status, ensuring they are based on current scientific knowledge and do not perpetuate stigma or injustice. And just last month, we saw the Department of Justice entered into agreement with Shelby County in Tennessee with the district attorney, which agreed not to prosecute individuals living with HIV under Tennessee's aggravated prostitution law. A win already in our country. We want to see more of that. We need to lean into that momentum and modernize and ground our policies in the latest scientific evidence, not in fear. So that's priority number one. Priority number two is doing the work that we're doing and sort of accelerating that. So strengthening our HIV response. So we have the tools and we need to employ them. We have some progress and we need to accelerate it. The time is now. So we need to scale up successful interventions that includes ones created by and for people with lived experiences. That means making sure our Black-led, Latina-led, queer-led organizations have the political and financial support to be successful. We must strengthen coordination and collaboration across federal agencies and departments. There's already great momentum happening in the space. We've seen collaborations around HIV work in our housing community. We've seen hosting of joint community engagement sessions. We've been exploring cross agencies around syndemics. We've seen a lot of bidirectional conversations with our global partners as well, and so we want to continue that momentum. And we must explore ways to invest in the HIV infrastructure to enhance collective impact. The infrastructure reality, the unfortunate reality is that we're not seeing an increase in HIV funds right now. So that means we need to recalibrate and we need to think differently about our current funding mechanisms, explore more opportunities to effectively and efficiently braid funds. We know that the National HIV Strategy, as I mentioned earlier, expires or ends this current one in 2025. And so I've already started working with HHS on sort of thinking ways, what's the next iteration of this? What do it mean for 2025 and beyond? And so we need to increase visibility and action to the data and outcomes from the past strategy. We need to identify innovation and generate impact stories. And we need to, again, begin the development of the next iteration. And that's combing through a lot of the engagement sessions that already happened over the past 2 years, listening sessions that a lot of our federal colleagues have done, and then seeing where the gaps are. You know, historically for the strategy, we have a series of listening sessions. So my goal is to see what we already heard and let the community know that we've heard you, and then figure out where do we need to go from there. And that also includes going to spaces that is not HIV focused, working with organizations that are working on civil rights, that are working on LGBT rights, immigration rights, reproductive rights, because HIV rights also need to be heard. We need to look at our data and quality improvements. Where available, we need to integrate and synchronize across government HIV-related data systems for effective tracking, implement continuous quality improvement processes. And on Monday, as many of you probably have heard, HHS released a fact sheet on our 1-year impact of the HHS Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity, or SOGI, Data Action Plan. We need to make sure that LGBTQ+I populations are included in federal surveys and data collection across the country. And it's an important step, and we need to make sure that the SOGI work in response to it was a response to President Biden's 2021 Executive Order 14075. And all divisions at HHS have already reviewed the data instrument and have initiated determination and have started incorporating SOGI data measures where possible. So again, as I mentioned, some of these are things that are already in motion, and we need to continue building the momentum on that. Admiral Levine already talked about this endemic approaches, and we're going to hear a little today about some of that. We need to accelerate those approaches. You know, health issues do not occur, as you know, in isolation. They intersect and amplify each other. We must do the same with our response. We must intersect and amplify. Our approach must be holistic and unapologetic, recognizes the interconnected nature of HIV, STIs, and other social determinants of health. And then translational research. We've been doing a lot of great work across agencies, looking at best practices, looking at innovation. And so we must foster collaboration across federal entities to streamline the translation of cutting-edge HIV research and demonstration projects into effective public health programs and policies. We need to support the development and diffusion of prevention strategies and care models that can rapidly be adopted to reduce HIV transmission and improve viral suppression and health outcomes. I need some water. Priority number 3. Thank you for humoring me. Is the one that I think all of us are passionate about in this room is equity. We need to promote equity and access. We need to ensure that access to life-saving, thank you so much, life-saving medicines and resources for people living with and disproportionately impacted by HIV. We need to eliminate systemic barriers, foster inclusivity, and improve the quality of life. We know for HIV and AIDS, and we've talked about this around lifetime survivors, about 55% of people with HIV are currently over the age of 50, and that share will continue to grow. Yet there's very little scientific research on how to treat the chronic diseases of aging in HIV patients. So we need to continue working with our federal colleagues to strengthen existing programs and assess gaps in services for people aging with HIV. PrEP access and expansion. Increasing PrEP accessibility and affordability through interagency collaboration is key. We need to mitigate barriers to PrEP access and ensure more individuals can benefit from this preventative measure. We need to partner with community health centers, pharmacies, and other partners to widen distribution. We need to lean into the longstanding trust of our HIV organizations, as well as the far-reaching Black, Latina, and queer organizations' influence. We need to look, as I mentioned, across these different issues, immigration, reproductive rights, and make sure that we are focusing and integrating HIV into those conversations as well. And my last piece in this priority area, and there's a bunch of other stuff, but I'm trying to keep within the minutes, is the workforce. And I know that PACHA has talked a lot about the workforce. I know there's a lot of initiatives and conversations happening around the workforce pipeline. We need to strengthen the HIV workforce to address the realities, the needs, and the visions of communities disproportionately impacted by HIV. We recognize the fatigue and challenges by our current workforce, who have been stretched thin by COVID, by MPOX, and ongoing HIV and STI responsibilities. That means implementing strategies to support and retain our dedicated professionals, ensuring that they have resources and support that they need to continue the vital work. We need to ensure retention through supportive policies, mental health resources, and work-life balance initiatives. We need to develop and implement incentives to attract new talent to HIV workforce, including competitive salaries, professional development opportunities, and recognition programs. We need to foster the growth of emerging diverse workforce that reflects the communities we serve, including Black, brown, and queer. We need to encourage interdisciplinary collaboration between doctors, nurses, social workers, and other healthcare professionals to provide comprehensive care. We need to pass the mic to the next generation of the HIV workforce. We need to ensure they have the opportunities for leadership and influence to shape the future of this work that we're doing today. We need to promote diversity and inclusion within all levels of the workforce, ensuring a broad representation of perspectives and experience. And to close, my last sheet. My focus this coming months will be to work alongside all of you, as I mentioned, to center science, to accelerate our efforts, and to emphasize the humanity at the heart of this mission. This appointment might have been a surprise to many of you. It was a surprise to me to be sitting here today with you. I'm not a medical officer. I'm not an epi guy. I'm not a biostatistician. or a long-term policy wonk. While I have other credentials and experiences, this role is about much more. This appointment is about the Black and Brown community members who often feel marginalized and unseen. It's about the immigrants who have come to this country, contributing to the greatness and seeking a place to belong. It's about the queer individuals who proudly display their rainbows, even in the face of relentless attacks on their humanity. This appointment is about the science that guide us, the work that drives us, and the humanity that inspires us. Juntos, together, we can ensure that every person, regardless of their background or identity, is seen, heard, and supported in our collective response to HIV in this country. Thank you for your dedication and partnership. Let's move forward today and always. Adelante.
Thank you, Francisco, and it is no surprise to me while you were sitting in that seat. I appreciate the words of your priorities, provides very clear direction, and I think is perfectly aligned with the priorities of those of us who sit around this table, and really the heart and the energy that you bring to impacting communities who continue to be challenged by HIV disease in this country. So thank you for what you do, what you will continue to do, and we are here to support you as well. And I am looking forward to the day where we are able to collectively and together say that we have done what we have came to do. So thank you. Next, we are going to hear a couple of more updates. Next on our agenda, we have joined with us this morning, and I am excited that she was able to carve out some time to share with us. But Dr. Marrazzo began her tenure as the 6th National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases Director in the fall of 2023. She oversees a $6.6 billion budget that supports research to advance the understanding, diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of infectious, immunologic, and allergic diseases, and she's internationally recognized for her research and education efforts in the field of sexually transmitted infections, especially as they affect women's health. Dr. Marrazzo's research and discovery and implementation science has focused on the human microbiome, specifically as it relates to female reproductive tract infections and hormonal contraception, prevention of HIV infection, as well as pre-exposure prophylaxis. One of the amazing feats is that in her tenure, she has also been able to accomplish becoming an author, a co-author, and editor of more than 250 scientific publications. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Marrazzo to provide her remarks on science to public health implementation.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction, Marlene. I'm really honored, humbled to be here. I've been in this job now about 8 months, and it is always great when I can feel like I'm back with my people. It's been great, but this is really my home. This is my always been my passion. And I'm really in awe that I get to speak with this really incredibly important group. So thank you for having me. I just will take you through a few slides, and hopefully this will be useful. You have such a rich agenda, as has already been noted, and you're going to dive very deeply into many of the topics that I will just touch on. But I want you to know that we're thinking about them and where we're going, and a little bit about what's happening at NIAID. So I wanted to just make sure people knew a little bit about who we are. Our organizational chart has actually changed a little bit in the last 5 years, which I hope you will find welcome. I think we still need to do some work to enrich the diversity in particular of our leadership. But we're getting there. But I have thoughts about that. We can talk about that if we have time. And I hope I can have some questions at the end. I hope to sort of blow through these slides pretty quickly. But as you'll see, I am the director, and my deputy director, Dr. Hugh Auchincloss, who has been the deputy director now for about 17 years, will be retiring this summer. So we have an active search going on for that critical position. And then, of course, I think the groups that are most of interest to you are probably Carl Diefenbach's leadership of the Division of AIDS and Emily Erbelding leading the Division of Microbiology and Infectious Diseases, because that's where all the work on STIs and MPOX and reproductive tract infections sit. And then, of course, allergy, immunology, and transplantation, led by Dan Rotrosen. A lot of the primary immunology work that characterized early responses to HIV came out of that group. So just a couple of things for you to be aware of. Now, our portfolio, which was mentioned, has, as you know, a major emphasis on HIV. And in fact, those are sort of our three big buckets, and they're largely assembled around the way the money flows, as you know. But about a third of our budget is dedicated to HIV-related diseases. So that includes HIV, AIDS, as well as diseases that people living with HIV are disproportionately affected by. So tuberculosis, Mpox, STIs, comorbidities of aging, like the Reprieve trial we worked on with the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute to address the metabolic dysfunction that we see with aging that's accelerated in people living with HIV. So quite a lot of activity there, largely in therapeutic and vaccine development. But I will say, coming to the NIH from the outside and having lived the work that the NIH does with the community around HIV, really I've understood that this sets the standard for community engagement. It's not perfect, but compared to many other infections in particular, but even other chronic conditions, having groups like this, advocates like this, community involvement like this with people to really understand what we're trying to do, and more importantly, help us really strategize on the research agenda so it speaks to what people need in the community, is incredible. And we shouldn't take it for granted, because it does not happen in many other parts of the research community. I would say, well, I won't give you any examples, but we can talk about that later if you want to. So what is our HIV plan? The vision and research priorities are listed on the left side. I don't think that I need to go through these. These are very familiar to many of you. We are really focused on prevention. We're focused on treatment. We have not given up on cure. In fact, some very exciting advances in the cure realm, I think. Co-infections, comorbidities, I mentioned, critical involvement of the community, and trying to make sure that we get the most impacted populations to participate in our research so that our findings are relevant to the people who are most effective. That sounds easier than it is, and many people are really engaged in trying to make sure that happens. The other thing, I like this diagram on the right side because it really emphasizes that this is probably one of the most multidisciplinary fields that you will ever see. And it's one of the reasons we've made such great advances. I think we recognized very early on that if you didn't have strong behavioral and social sciences, if you didn't have a focus on health disparities, if you didn't have a focus on good messaging and information dissemination and implementation, that you really weren't going to take the discoveries in basic science out to the people who need them. We still are not there yet. It's not perfect. But I do think that trying to sort of spin a web around all of these exciting areas like next generation HIV therapies it has really taken a village, and more than a village, probably the entire globe. So it's very exciting still to be in this work, and there's a lot to do. Speaking of a lot to do, I know you're going to do a deep dive on the most recent data, but I just wanted to point out that, of course, the data that came out just a couple weeks ago in the United States looking at HIV incidence, I think you could look at this a couple of different ways. There are some positive signals, but I think for those of us who are not just long-term survivors living with the infection, but people who have been in the field for so long, this is too slow. This progress is just not fast enough. And every time, you know, as I think you know, I came to Washington from Birmingham, Alabama. Every time I took care of patients on the inpatient service there, at least 1 or 2 times a week, we would have a late stage young person, often 20, 22, sometimes 40, 42, come in with late stage diagnosis of AIDS, not previously known to be HIV infected. And it was really all about stigma and lack of access to care and prevention in a way that felt safe and accessible. And that's despite having what I'm biased, think is one of the best Ryan White sort of consortiums in the country in that state. We have an amazing network with as Dr. Cheever knows and has been very supportive of. So we can do it, but it's not happening for everybody. And that is incredibly frustrating to me to see that. It was just heartbreaking. And again, we can talk more about that if we have time. So I think some encouraging signs here when you look at 2022, but really very, very little change in heterosexual contact as a category, injection drug use, and even in male-to-male sexual contact, given the availability of PrEP, the efficacy of PrEP, and the apparent uptake of PrEP, regardless of PrEP deserts, we still are not seeing as much impact as we should. So just a call to action and a recognition that we can't let up and we can't stop talking about the root causes about this, which is what I know you are all extremely invested in. A couple of words about our basic science portfolio. I just want to mention that I'm not going to do a tutorial on our basic science portfolio, but it is very exciting, and it is really important that people recognize, and not so much this group, but the people who support the research, that the discoveries in basic science have informed the development of so many of our prevention and treatment strategies, and really are informing, as I'll talk about in a minute, exciting developments in antibody and vaccine development. So critical to keep this going. Our primary areas of focus in the division writ large do include basic research, target interventions as listed there, epidemiology, especially clinical outcomes, including TB and HIV, and of course, as you are going to talk about later, ending the HIV epidemic. So I do have a quick slide on the role of our funded Centers for AIDS Research in their efforts to contribute to the ETHE effort. What have we accomplished in HIV prevention in the last few years? I just want to point these out because many of these did come out of funding directly to us. Now, that's not credit to us, it's credit to us to be able to fund the people to do the work with us. And that includes many of you. And of course, it includes the involvement of the community and the participants who participated in all these studies. I think the approval of injectable CAB-LA is a very exciting signal for the potential of prevention. And I think some of you probably saw yesterday and the day before a lot of announcements about the lenacapavir trials, which are now being staged, the PURPOSE trials, which partly funded by industry, partly funded by us, a great model for thinking strategically about how you study a really great potential drug and think about it for the populations who need it in the locales that they need it. And I would encourage you to take a look at that nice graphic that AVAC has about the phases of the PURPOSE landscape so that we can get lenacapavir studied and importantly, be prepared to get it to people. Because of course, the concern about CAB is that we are not really teed up to get it to the people who really need it the most right now. We do have some very exciting broadly neutralizing antibody work. I'll talk about that in a second. And we are looking at a bunch of antibodies as a potential prevention and maybe even treatment modality. I'm personally have been interested in the development of vaginally delivered and rectally delivered interventions. The dapivirine ring is, I think, an exciting option. Could we do better? Make a stronger prevention tool, maybe one that includes contraception, maybe, wow, include one that prevents herpes. Could you imagine? Yes, we should imagine these things and we should be working on them. And I think that, again, coming back to this issue of stigma and access and self-perception of risk and what's really important to people. Maybe what's really important to people is not to have an unintended pregnancy, in the next 6 months. And oh, by the way, maybe there's a risk of HIV and you'd like to prevent that too. people have very different needs at very different times in their life. And if we don't respond to that, then I really think we're missing the boat. So I think that's exciting and it's a good way to go. And as I mentioned, we are looking at co-formulating oral contraception right now with TDF-FTC, but I think that the sky's the limit when you start looking at potentials for other ways to do this. It's complicated, I understand that, especially around regulatory aspects of combinations, but we have done hard things. I think we can do hard things in the future. So just a couple of comments about that. And so I think our scientific initiative and programs really emphasize all of that. I just want to say the sustained release of antivirals, I think, is critical. Next generation multi-purpose, which means HIV, STIs, perhaps contraception. Some very interesting work for transgender people who have, I think, very specific needs around prevention and treatment and may have specific alterations, as we know, in immunity, drug pharmacokinetics that we need to think about. And then pediatric and HIV prevention science. I'm still amazed at how many perinatal transmissions occur globally, largely outside of PEPFAR countries. And to me, that says if you build it and you make it available, people will access it and you can actually prevent perinatal transmission. I think there's still 130,000 perinatal transmission events a year, and that is just not okay. So we need to really do that and dive into that. Just a couple of comments about vaccines, because, you know, a lot of people, I think, are very excited about these 6-month long-acting chemo prevention tools. They're going to be great if they happen, but we need to continue to work on a vaccine for so many reasons. It's really the only way I think we're going to ultimately eliminate this virus. And I think even those of you who are not in the vaccine world or are not virologically inclined understand that it's been really hard to make a vaccine for many reasons. One of the things that has been problematic has been that you need antibodies that are incredibly broad, and even in people who have been infected with HIV for years, don't get produced until the very end. So it's been a very interesting quest to try to sort of get these antibodies produced. People are very excited about messenger RNA or mRNA vaccines, given what we did with COVID. That's not as simple as it sounds. As you may know, making the lipid nanoparticle that holds the mRNA is a distinct science of its own. And so you can't just sort of purchase it on the market and switch out whatever little piece of vaccine antigen you might like. I wish we could, but we're not there yet. And then you have the challenge of how do you study vaccine in a time when we have excellent prevention tools that we need to give people in the trials, right? So you can't really look at incidence of infection. You don't want your participants getting infected in vaccine trials anymore. We never did, but we can't have it now. It would be, I think, a failure of our standard of care. So lots of complicated discoveries. That said, I'm just going to show you a couple of things that I think are really promising. And it is really staggering to note we have been at this for over 2.5 decades, right? To me, this says these are some of the most tenacious people in the field. We would also not have had a COVID vaccine within 3 to 6 months if we did not have this 26 years of work to build on. So a huge shout out to everybody who has stuck with this, all the volunteers who have, engaged in the many, many trials that did not show what we wanted them to show, but gave us incredibly useful information. So I try to make that point a lot because people say, well, you've been at it for almost 3 decades and you haven't done anything. And that's a huge lie. We have done a ton, and we would not be where we're at with many of our science advances. So, a couple of things. This is kind of nerdy, but just again, coming back to this issue, what you want most vaccines to do is create antibodies. It's on one side of the immune system, but we've never been able to get a vaccine that produced the kinds of antibodies that we need to truly take the virus out. And when you did see those antibodies come out, we had a signal in the Thai trial. Remember, many years ago now, there was that sort of signal that there was a little efficacy. We do know what antibodies came out of that trial, but we've never been able to replicate our ability to get people to produce those with another vaccine. So it's been very frustrating. Just again, a mention, I'm not going to go into details here, but I want to say that this whole concept of getting people to make these antibodies is right now scientifically, I would say, exponentially getting more exciting just in the last couple of months. And I think the next slide just has 3 papers that have come out in probably what some people consider is the top journal in this space, Cell, or Cell Host and Microbe. In the last year, these are way too technical for me to even begin to describe. Not an immunologist, but what I will say is that to have 3 papers of this stature, all from the CHOV-D group or our Centers for HIV Vaccine Development, which are located not just at NIAID, but also at Duke and at Scripps in California, to have 3 papers come out and say, we actually see a pathway to get humans to produce these broadly neutralizing antibodies is actually incredible. And I think that this has not, it's got a little bit of press, but frankly, I think it's too complicated for people to understand. And I say that as somebody who has struggled to understand it because it's really complicated. But suffice it to say that even when you start with rhesus macaques, you go to mice and then you go to humans, really positive signals. So not promising anything, but I hope within the next 5 years or so, maybe this acceleration will continue. What's going on with treatment? These are our goals. I don't think anybody is going to be surprised to see these goals. We want better treatment, safer treatment. You don't have to use it as long. We want it to have incredibly high resistance barrier. We do not want to see escape HIV at all. And we want to understand when people stay on these treatments for a really long time, what does it do to their bodies? How is it affecting their life as long-term survivors of this infection? So all of those are really incredible. The HIV life cycle is incredibly complex. I just want to use this graphic to point out that all of these areas where the virus invades and then multiplies and then pumps out its progeny, all of these have targets for drugs now, which again is a function of that last 20 some years of research. So the vaccine field has also informed our understanding of how we can intercept at many of these cycles. And you can see that in our pretty amazing pipeline, right? We, in the teens, really kind of the 2010s entered a decade, I think, of that was a golden era, really, of getting great combinations that were incredibly suppressive, increasingly safe, increasingly tolerable. And we're now in a place where people really can take 1 pill a day and do very well, and even less than 1 pill a day, as we'll talk about in a second. So we're doing great, but we can't stop because we're always going to need more options. Right now, I am very cognizant, as are many, that we were relying on the integrase inhibitor class, dolutegravir, pretty much globally. And we have not seen resistance, but that's not to say that we could not see resistance one day. And if that happens, where are we going to be? We're going to be challenged because it's a great drug. It's a safe drug. We use it in pregnancy. But it is something that you really can't take your eye off the ball. So a couple of things that are going on there that I think related to some comments I heard Admiral Levine make and others. We want to think about not just better formulations, but also better tools for people to use these drugs. Point of home care testing, right? For virologic suppression. Wouldn't that be good? You could actually have people take real control of what they're doing. They don't have to go into an office to see somebody to get their viral load checked. I mentioned maternal and child treatment options. Can't forget that many kids still get HIV, as I mentioned. So treating kids is a whole other area. And then new tools for monitoring adherence. And then a couple of words just about cure. A lot is going on here, too much to talk about, but we have several Martin Delaney Center collaboratories that some of you may know or may even be a part of that participate in cure research. One thing that has been really nice to see since I would say the last decade, since I've gotten to know these teams a little bit better, is their engagement of community. They have done a really nice job, I think, going from being kind of a wonky, no, not, that's a compliment for me if I call you wonky, kind of a very focused science. How do we get the reservoir activated? Where's the reservoir? Who's in the reservoir? To engaging with the community about the implications of cure, which are, kind of huge, especially for people who've lived with HIV for decades. So yes, it's an amazing goal, and we are working on it very hard. We have a very interesting set of studies around gene editing in particular, using CRISPR, that we're talking with folks about in the sickle cell area in particular, but recognizing that these are really challenging areas, and we have to keep talking about it with people. So some cure challenges, I mentioned the reservoir. Where is HIV hiding in the body? How do you get it out without harming the body? And then how do you really tailor cure strategies to the individual person? That's going to be, I think, a decade-long timeline at least. But it is moving along, and it is a very active area of research. Can't not talk about co-infections and comorbidities. As an infectious disease physician, this is a lot of what I spent my time doing in terms of taking care, not just of acute illnesses, but also people in my HIV clinic. TB is a very big focus. Remember, TB is still the biggest killer of people living with HIV globally. So we cannot stop focusing on that. And then I think hepatitis B, hepatitis C, trying to chase those down and think about the next steps. We do have a cure for hepatitis C, but we still have a lot of new hepatitis C infections in this country for many reasons, too many reasons for me to go into. But I think that, again, my goal is to get people to think about people living with HIV as a whole person who happens to get infected with other things and happens to have other comorbidities. It's not taking anything away from the fact that HIV is incredibly singularly important in the landscape of what we do and in our lifetimes for sure. But people are living longer, they're staying healthy, and they are getting these other conditions. And if we don't start to see people in that context, then I think we're failing them and their ability to really lead a whole informed life. We do have several clinical trials networks. Many of you are familiar with these, so I will not belabor them, but there's an AIDS clinical trials group, HIV prevention trials group. There's the IMPACT group, which is focused on maternal and pediatric and adolescent health. There's the vaccine trials group. And these are actually coming up for recompetition in a couple years. So it will be an interesting time to see what we do. You can see how much we spend there. It's a lot of money on the networks, and we have more than gotten our money's worth, I would say. That would be my, again, admittedly, maybe not objective take. But having been working in these networks, actually for my whole career, even before coming to NIH, I think they have really done a lot. And as I mentioned before, often set the standard for community engagement. Community working groups in some of these networks, I often it's not really a joke, but I often say that some of the hardest and most stressful talks I have ever given have been in front of the community working groups of these networks, because I have to explain the science, I have to explain what we're doing, and I have to do it in a way that recognizes that everybody in the room, many people know more about living with these conditions than I do for sure. And many people have experiences that I just can't even imagine. And I can only learn about from talking with them. So these are our fully funded clinical research sites. You can see it has a really wide global reach, much of it concentrated in sub-Saharan Africa in particular, but also Southeast Asia and Central and South America. So pretty exciting. And then just last, I'll mention that there are some additional high priority cross-cutting programs that I would just sort of say go across all of these areas. I mentioned EHE, but I also want to just mention pandemic preparedness very briefly. The way that we think about operationalizing EHE is, again, through our main modalities of the levers that we have to push, which are to work on the treatment and the prevention, and to some extent the diagnostic side. But really, that's what we need to do, and also support people who need to respond quickly. So that is the goal. And as I think you all know, everybody's working on this. You've got a whole panel later on the agencies working on EHE. So I just want to point out what we do, and what we aim to do is to inform HHS and partners on evidence-based practices and effectiveness. And that's our contribution to EHE. A few things that we can talk about in terms of our ending the HIV epidemic. The big one here is done through our Centers for AIDS Research, or the CFARs. And in July of 2022, we made 66 awards to these. I'll show you them on a separate slide. And we continue every year to invest in their ability to do work, both globally and domestically. And these are our CFAR sites. Again, many of you are well aware of these. But you can also see that the ones in the Southeast and to some extent the Southwestern United States are focused in areas where we have, unfortunately, the highest persistent incidence of HIV and of AIDS as well. So that's a very, very valuable thing. It may not seem totally relevant, but I just want to point out that the pandemic response that we were involved with could not have happened without the infrastructure that we had in the clinical trials networks and the expertise and community engagement. So again, it comes back to being ready, being prepared, and knowing who does good work, and then enlisting them in the event of a public health emergency, which is exactly what we did. We leveraged our clinical trials network to support COVID research through the COVID prevention network, and that involved testing COVID vaccines, testing treatments, actually looking at, for example, remdesivir in pregnant and lactating people. Very good to have that set up because you know how hard that work is to get off the ground. And we actually were able to significantly contribute to setting up the STOMP trial, which is the TPOXX trial for Mpox. So the challenge is, as you know, when things happen, whether it's H5N1, whether it's Mpox, whether it's another SARS-CoV-2, is to be able to pivot, but also to keep doing what you need to do. HIV is not going away, right? People are still getting infected with HIV. They're still coming in with opportunistic infections. They're still coming in with cancers. So the pandemic really stretched us and challenged us to try to keep that all together and also pivot and respond. So I just want to stop there. Again, thank you, give you some insight into what we're doing and what the priorities are. And I may have a little time for questions and we'd be delighted to hear your thoughts as well as take your questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Marrazzo. We do have a couple of questions. Jeff.
Excuse me. Thank you, Dr. Marrazzo, especially for the shout out to the community involvement. I've been doing that for 30 years, so it's gratifying to see it being recognized, especially at the Delaney Collaboratories in the Cure Research arena. And you're right, there was nothing at the beginning. They started the network in the name of Martin Delaney and didn't have any community involvement. And we quickly challenged them on that, and they, to their credit, they changed it. One thing I think we do need to emphasize beyond that community involvement is socio-behavioral research. It's not really happening. It's not funded. It's not part of the scientific agenda currently. We have an opportunity with the recompetition to do so, and I really would appreciate support from the top down for those efforts. Certainly, we've been engaging Dr. Diefenbach and others, but this has been happening across the networks, ACDG as well. It's there in name, but not funded. Ditto in the MDC. They've done an amazing job in HPT and HVTN. We need to translate those successes into cure and clinical research at the ACDG. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Jeff. Appreciate it and noted.
And we will have Paul, Tori, Carol, and Rania, and then we'll move on the agenda. Go ahead, Paul.
First, I just want to say thank you so much for your presentation. It was extraordinarily helpful to listen to. I also wanted to second your discussion about urgency. We've been doing this work for a long time, and I'm really old, and I'm really tired, and I want this to end before I die. I really do. And I guess I would say this to all the federal partners that are here. Thank you for everything that you're doing. It truly is greatly appreciated. And we got to go faster. We've just got to go faster. And one of the pieces on your slide that I thought was so interesting and so important was implementation science. One of the things is we can create all the great treatments in the world. We can do all the most fabulous science in the world. But if we don't reach the communities in need, then it's almost useless. And so one of my concerns is that if you look at the data right now, we're missing too many people. And we are missing too many people who we have historically missed for so long. And so how are we going to make that bridge so that we can bring the promise of all this science to the communities most in need?
Paul, thank you. I could not agree more. I mean, you're totally speaking to my heart and my brain. I will say two things. One is that the idea of getting treatment to people who need it the most that we're missing. I didn't have a slide on the Latitude study, but I will just mention the Latitude study because that was a study that looked at a long-acting injectable treatment for people who were unable to be suppressed with sort of just quote unquote routine access to clinics for the usual oral therapies. And it showed a significant benefit. People stayed suppressed. I mean, it was a remarkable success. The final presentation is still to be published, but it was presented at the HIV meeting in February. People told the organizers of that study early on that was never going to work. Why are you designing that study? Why are you even going to try to enroll these populations? Because it's just not going to work. It's that kind of attitude that to me is doing a huge disservice to our most vulnerable populations. It's like you can't give up, right? You always have to refine your approaches to try to really get to people where they are. And I think for too long we've just expected people to come to us because we are us, right? We are all that. So I think that's one thing. The other thing I'll say is speaking about people left behind, it is exciting that the DoxyPAP study or recommendations came out. But, I wrote a somewhat critical editorial in the New England Journal a couple of months ago because they published a study that showed that DoxyPAP did not work in women, quote unquote, in Kenya, probably because they didn't use it. And so it's great to see this happening, and we think we need it. But once again, we're leaving a whole population behind that really has not been adequately studied. It's very similar to the early days of oral PrEP. And trying to understand why didn't they take it? Maybe that's not what they want. Maybe they don't really, so it's frustrating. That's a bigger example, but I am with you, and I think we've got to keep our eyes on that ball.
Perhaps this side, Tori, can you go?
Thank you for that presentation. Thank you so much for also including trans people in the section, the key program section. So I was very optimistic about seeing that. What innovative strategies do you have for engaging trans people, and who will be leading that work? That's very, very important.
It's a great question. The people who are leading that work at the level of the studies that I mentioned are largely in the community working groups that are engaged. And you might have, I didn't again show the slide purpose, but there is a specific study of purpose that I think is started already that is specifically for trans people. And they are very, it's not just that they're included, they actually have objectives to make sure that they are appropriately represented both in numbers and also in terms of demographics. So I would say right now it's at the level of those studies in the community working groups, but it would be really good to send the signal from more centrally that this is something we really care about. And I don't think we have always done that. I didn't mention this, but we are working on our strategic plan. I think many of you actually provided input, which is great. We are going to have a little bit of a different strategic plan. I like the pretty brochures. They're nice, but we're going to try to do a little bit more engagement and challenging sort of topic area updates every year. Have we addressed this? What have we done here? And I think actually thinking about the inclusion of the key populations is something we should be held accountable to on an annual basis. So I count on you to be attentive to that, and I may come back to you to talk about that. Thank you.
I think we have Carol and then Ryan. So Carol?
Thank you for that presentation, and also congratulations on your appointment. That's awesome. My name is Carol Treston. I'm with the Association of Nurses in AIDS Care. I was also a PACTG study nurse on 076 and was the director of the PACTG Impact office for 4 years. And so I completely understand the challenges of clinical trials, not only in design, but also in just enrollment and et cetera, conduct. But that being said, I think we've heard a lot today, and I see that on your slide about the importance of implementation trials. And I would like to shine a light on the role of nurses and nurse scientists in implementation trials, and how important that is. And too frequently, nursing research is sent to NINR, which is a wonderful institute, but funded with like $0. And so I would encourage you to think about how do we expand nurse-led nurse scientists. For example, HPTN 096 with the co-PI of LaRon Nelson, who's a nurse scientist, is really looking at important implementation science for young Black gay men in the South. So, not only through the networks, but also encouraging expanded inclusion of nurse scientists in the CFARs. That's something that we've been trying to encourage, and is also nurse scientists are underrepresented there. So not sure how much you can steer that ship, but asking that have some attention in the coming years.
Thank you. That's incredibly valuable input. Again, as somebody who had an HIV clinic for 20 years, the physicians are important, but the nurses really get the work done. And often are the main, just incredible people. So, and also, I agree, have a unique role to play in designing and conducting research studies. It's really can ask different questions and equally important questions. So that's very valuable. Thanks.
Hi, Dr. Marrazzo. My name is Rania. I had the privilege of moderating a webinar with you a few weeks ago. And I'm not going to talk too much about really the need for vaginal microbicide options for women and the options that we have globally that we don't have here in the US. We can save that for another day, but I'm very excited to have you in the role when you've been such an advocate when it comes to particularly women's health. And so that's very exciting. I wanted to talk though, I agree with Paul around the need for implementation science and what that really means, and that we spend so much and really resource the development of these innovations, but they aren't making the mark when it comes to actually rolling out in community. And obviously, you know that. I started my career in coordinating the African American HIV University Science and Treatment College, and it was all about making sure that people in the HIV workforce understood the science and treatment of HIV so we can actually utilize these innovative tools. And when I look around the field, I think it's something that still continues to miss is how do we make sure that our workforce, implementation science is a science. And there are strategies and tactics that go with that, but where are we making sure that we have a workforce who's actually implementing it that knows how to do that? And so we have some capacity building programs that I think strive to make sure that we have a workforce, particularly an allied healthcare professional workforce that know how to do interventions, but the adaptation and making sure that I think when it comes to implementation science, the approaches for how we utilize those interventions are actually effective. And so I'm interested in what role you think your department, your institute plays in making sure that implementation science strategies and tactics are actually utilized by the folks who are doing implementation work, and if there's opportunity for expansion of supporting the workforce and their ability to do that.
Yeah, Rania, thanks for that. I think the people who say they don't like implementation science don't really understand what implementation science is. So if you are against it, then you need to learn about it. And I don't think that there's any better example of the need for implementation science than the many trials that didn't show an effect because people weren't taking the product, but also all of the debate around vaccines and vaccine uptake, right? That's probably the biggest case study of our time. I view science as a spectrum from discovery to implementation. So what I really like when I talk to people is sort of like, yes, we take a lot of risk in the discovery space because you've got to invest. It's risky. You never know what's gonna come out. by the time you get to the part where you're trying to get into people's lives, you have a lot more data, but there's still a whole other piece that's missing. And you just don't really know how they're going to react, what their needs are, how they're going to contextualize this, how you need to message it, all of that stuff. So what I really like to think of it as is that work being done in parallel as you move along. I think for too long, we have focused on discovery science as the only thing that we really need to sort of think about. And then, oh, wow, we have something great. Let's figure out how to get it to people. But you kind of need to start early. And I think the best kind of products and the most well-done clinical trials have engaged in that work from the get-go. Again, it's risky because the product might not work in the clinical trial, but at least you're having the dialogue early on and you're adapting your approach in the trial to try to make sure that it has the best chance to work as possible. So I definitely hear you. How that's implemented, no pun intended, but how that's actually incorporated and talked about, I think is the really key thing. We fund a lot of what I think of as implementation science. But again, people either don't want to call it that, don't see it as that, or don't understand how critical it is. So I really appreciate your comments, and I think that will be talked about in our strategic plan. So thank you.
Let's give another round of applause to Dr.
Thank you.
Marrazzo. Thank you. I echo Rania. I am excited for your leadership and you being at the helm there. So more to come. And just wanted to remind PACHA members that the presentations will be made accessible to you in one zip file. I saw a number of you trying to capture the slides and just wanted to remind you, you will have all of the presentations submitted to you before we leave DC. And next, we have just a brief overview and update about our country's mpox response before we go to the break. But as many of you know, parts of our country are indeed recognizing and celebrating Pride Month. Admiral Levine talked about the Summer of Pride and that we thought it would be important to have an update regarding the country's mpox response. Dr. Warren, who will be making those updates to us, as a health communication specialist with the HHS Office of Infectious Disease and HIV/AIDS Policy, and he's here to share a little bit with us before we go to the break. So welcome and thank you, Dr. Warren.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. So excited to be here. I am controlling my slides, so bear with me. I think that, yes. Okay, so I am here, like she mentioned, to talk about mpox, and like Director Ruiz mentioned, I am also not an epi guy, so I'm going to give a very high-level overview of where we are with mpox. But more importantly, I want to talk about our HHS-led and White House-led mpox equity intervention that we call Summer of Pride. But so very quickly, where we are with mpox domestically, there is very low activity with mpox around the country. We are seeing some localized surges in metropolitan areas like LA, New York City, and Charlotte. But there is a big outbreak that's currently happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo that is a bit of a concern for us back at home as the summer months commence and we start to see more travel internationally and things of that nature. On your screen, there are 3 graphs, and hopefully you can see them, but what they're basically depicting is that for mpox cases and related deaths, Black and brown LGBTQI plus communities are overrepresented for cases and related deaths, but underrepresented for vaccination rates. And I'm specifically talking about the mpox vaccine. And this is due to a myriad of systemic challenges like travel, low confidence in vaccines, and also just a lack of awareness. A lot of people that are eligible for the mpox vaccine, they aren't aware that it actually requires 2 doses for you to receive the optimum protection. And the vaccine right now is our biggest, most effective tool for protecting against mpox. This probably does not come as a surprise to many of you who do the work, but mpox is interconnected with several related health challenges. In fact, the majority of Mpox cases are attributed to individuals with late stage and untreated HIV as well as STIs and unstable housing. And severe outcomes such as hospitalizations and deaths are compounded by stigma, mental health struggles, and substance use. So recognizing all of this, a lot of federal agencies actually extended their funding flexibilities. Federal agencies, including CDC, HRSA, SAMHSA, and HUD, they extended their funding flexibilities for their grantees to be able to cover Mpox-related activities, really, again, emphasizing the fact that Mpox is a syndemic issue that is going to require a more holistic syndemic solution. Uh-oh. How do I go back? Okay, so as far as data that we have to guide us, the CDC did a great analysis back in 2022, and they actually just updated it. But they were looking at EHE jurisdictions that had low and medium Mpox immunity, meaning that their vaccination coverage for the Jynneos vaccine was below 30 to 35%. And this is a great indicator for us who are doing equity work to be able to prioritize jurisdictions that have a higher potential for a recurrent Mpox outbreak. So having that landscape of where we should target our Mpox equity efforts, and also just having a greater understanding of the systemic challenges that lie ahead of us, the HHS, as well as the White House, back in 2022 and 2023, led by Kay Hayes, actually, and Admiral Levine, we actually wanted to, or engaged in a series of solutions-focused conversations with community, really to understand how they thought that we should address this Mpox equity issue. And among several great suggestions, they had a lot of great suggestions, but a big directive that we as the federal government decided to hone in on was actually getting vaccines to Pride festivals, specifically Black Pride festivals, and house and ballroom community events. So we developed an intergovernmental Tiger team. I see some of my Tiger team members here today, so good to see you. And we collaborated with national umbrella organizations for house and ballroom and Pride festivals. And we worked together to identify up to 30 events that were happening across the summer and fall in those priority jurisdictions. And we worked to connect the event organizers with the local health departments and the local federally funded grantees. And we gave them the charge to work together to develop a syndemic wellness plan for the event that includes not just Mpox vaccines on site, but also we want to make sure that the event attendees have access to HIV and STI prevention resources. There's a big emphasis on syphilis. We also wanted to make sure that the event attendees had access to mental health resources, harm reduction, and housing navigation, to name a few. And Dr. Marrazzo mentioned the STOMP trial. We also make sure that these events have access to their local STOMP trial sites for the TPOXX treatment. And this also, this is just my favorite thing to mention, because I often get this question, like, what is the significance of Black Pride and house and ballroom? Research tells us that Pride festivals, especially Black Pride, they offer a unique opportunity to reach individuals who may have access issues related to stigma and a lack of health coverage. And these are also spaces that are frequented by Black and Brown LGBTQI+ populations. So we are essentially meeting the people at highest risk where they are. And then finally, this is just a snapshot of our Summer of Pride 2024 events. I think you do have a slide, a hard copy of this, but I just want to say, if you have any questions about where we will be across the country throughout the summer and fall, please feel free to reach out to me. We're always looking for opportunities to shed light on the specific activities that we have planned. And we're also always looking for opportunities for collaboration. And with that, thank you for your time and happy Pride.
I see you geared up, Marvell Terry. I will allow you to have our one question comment before the break. Go ahead, Marvell.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Warren, for your presentation. I have a lot of questions, but I will ask one question. 2 years ago, I called a meeting with Dr. D and Harold Phillips due to the access of the vaccine of Mpox in the South, particularly in Memphis. I had to fly to Canada to get my first vaccine. As I looked at your list of prides, it's still the largest cities. There are no smaller cities, I mean Charlotte, but there are no smaller cities on your implementation plan. And so my question is, how do we address this in the smaller jurisdictions that don't have access to the vaccine?
So again, the snapshot of the events with the jurisdictions that you're right, they are mostly major metropolitan areas, which is why we are focusing on those big Pride festivals, because as I mentioned, we noticed that those are the regional and local magnets for the those focused priority populations. So we noticed that people will often travel from those smaller cities to go to a Charlotte Pride, or I'm from Montgomery. A lot of people will go to Birmingham to go to Pride, and they will have access to those vaccines. Also, I want to say this is not the only effort that's being taken place right now to increase Mpox vaccine equity. There's a lot of localized efforts. Just for us, this was how we wanted to focus on prioritization. And then we're also working with community organizations that are doing their own thing as well. I also want to mention that back in 2022, there was a lot of, you're right, there was a lot of access issues because the vaccine was not commercially available. It is now commercially available since April 26th, I believe. So more spaces and communities have more access to the vaccine. So hopefully we'll see with this surge of engagement with Summer of Pride, more people getting shots in their arms, more smaller cities having more access with the commercialization of the vaccine, and then just more opportunities for increase in syndemic wellness planning like we're seeing with Summer of Pride.
And DeAndre will be the sequel to the last comment before the break.
You kind of answered a little bit more in depth of what I was going to follow with Marvel's question, because specifically when you said about those people in those smaller rural cities who go to those larger cities, is oftentimes those people are the ones who actually can't afford to go to those bigger cities to celebrate Pride. Pride is really expensive, even Black Pride, to get tickets to those events. So I just want to charge you and maybe consider, see if there's a possibility, or maybe there's an opportunity to create a smaller subcommittee to focus on those smaller communities and those smaller or more rural areas to figure out ways in which we can push this vaccine into those communities and go to where those people are as well. You got people like Marvell from smaller towns, myself from Beaumont, Texas, a little country town down in Southeast Texas, who are more than willing and able to assist with that if it's ever an opportunity that presents itself. So just something that could be a priority as well.
And great point, because there is a lot of efforts in Southeast, the part of the country. There's a lot of community-based organizations that are doing innovative type of programming or providing incentives. Like to your point, balls are very expensive to go to, and Pride festivals are very expensive to go to sometimes. So what we're seeing across the country in those priority jurisdictions are community-based organizations and the health departments actually sponsoring tickets for these people to be able to go to these events in exchange that you come and get your vaccine, or you come and get your syphilis or HIV screening. So we are starting to see an influx of more innovative strategies, to your point. So,
and thank you too.
Mm-hmm. And thank you, Dr. Warren. Thank you for that update and all the work that you do. And so we're only mildly off schedule. We will take a 10-minute break and return promptly. I do think we will be able to make up some time. We built in a lot of Q&A opportunity into the agenda today, so I'm not worried, but I do hope everyone returns 10 minutes. Thank you.
Produced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.